Hi, I'm Miss Finette from the Poplar Creek Library, here again with another educational video. Today we're going to be dissecting a flower, but before we do that, let's take a look at plants. A flower is a part of a plant, and you know that 90% of our plants are flowering plants. Now, as you can see, they come in a variety of colors, shapes, and sizes, even fragrances. But all flowers share different parts. But I really want to show you this. Like, this is actually a flower. And, just see all the different shapes and petals. Although they're different, they all share common parts. And that's what we're going to see when we dissect. We're going to look inside to see those common parts. But flowers all have one job, and that job is to create seeds and fruits. So we're going to be dissecting this flower. This is a lily, and this is a great example because it's really large, and when we dissect, we can see its parts. So let's get started seeing what's inside a flower. All right, so we're going to get started with the flower dissection, and like I said, this is a lily. And some of the materials you need, of course, a flower. I suggest a lily, tulips. They're not in bloom right now, but a larger flower so you can see the flower parts. I'm going to you can use tweezers to pick up the smaller items. If you have a magnifying glass, that's great. If you have a microscope, even greater. So you can use that to get a close-up. I am going to be using a little X-Acto, but you can use scissors. If you're going to use something sharp like this, please have an adult help you. You can also cut apart a flower with scissors will work, or a plastic knife. So we're going to get started with the first part of a flower. So the very first part is on the back, and they're called sepals. And the sepals actually protect the flower bud when it's growing and help stand up. Usually they're green. I'm going to just show you a better example of some sepals. See this bud? Those are enclosed in green sepals. So is this one. See how tight that is? And that's protecting the bud before it emerges. Now, we're having a lily, and a lily's a little different. Usually sepals are green, but sometimes they're the exact same color as the flower. And we could tell because they're the outer petals. They're really not petals, they're called sepals. And so we're going to take those off, and those just come off real easy. We're just going to pull them off, and I'm going to put them to the side. And this flower happens to have 3 sepals. So, oops, I'll make that show towards you. So those are the sepals. The next thing we have in a flower are the petals. And this is their main purpose, I'm going to pull those off, are to attract your pollinators. So they're going to come in all different colors and fragrances. So let me just put my label there. And if you're at home, you could just be writing that with a marker. So as you can see, these patterns will attract different pollinators, your bees, your butterflies. Also at the base of petals they create some nectar, and the nectar attracts your pollinators, your bees, and your butterflies. So that's their main purpose. And they also protect the inner part of the flower. And now you can see that inner part is exposed to us once I take the sepals and petals off. And what you have are different parts. You have male and female parts of a flower. And right here, these things right here, we're going to peel those off, and you can just peel them off. A smaller flower, you might need to use something like, you might want to pick them up if they're a lot smaller than that. So this part is the male part of the flower, and that is called the stamen. The whole thing is called the stamen. But if I take this apart, I'm going to cut off that little top part and this part. So this part is called the filament. Okay? And that holds up this little part I cut off, and that is called the anther. And this little part, the anther, as you can see, that holds the pollen. So you see how this flower, see the orange comes in all different, and this will really stain you. So that's all full of pollen grains. And I want to show you what pollen grains would look like under a microscope. For us, you can't really see them, and in smaller flowers, you might not even see them. So this is just an example of pollen grains under the microscope. And you can see they're all different colors. Some of them have spikes on them. So that's what that would look like under the microscope. So that we just took apart. That was the male part of the flower. Now all we have left is this. Check that out. And that is the female part of the flower, and that is called the pistil. This whole thing is called the pistil. I'm just going to break that off. And unfortunately, this is where it's really great to use either a magnifying glass or a microscope, because on the very tip of this pistil is the stigma. And if you are to touch it, and you can kind of see some liquid coming off of my finger maybe, it's very sticky. And think about that. Why do you think this top of this flower is really sticky? And I'm going to cut that little piece off. And if you had a microscope or magnifying glass, you could get a closer look. And that is called the stigma. And that's a real important part of the flower. The pollen grain is going to land on that stigma. And once it does, that's when pollination begins. Now this long tube is called the style, and that is where the pollen grain will travel down into this little part down here, which is called the ovary of the flower. Now, when that pollen hits that stigma, the pollen is really cool. It sends out a long tube that's going to go down the style, and it's going to go into the ovary. And in there, you're going to have the oval or the eggs. And I'm going to cut that apart in just 1 second. I want to just show you one of our main pollinators, the bee. And this is the honeybee. And can you see all that pollen up close? All that pollen is on him. And right here, these are called pollen baskets that they have on their hind legs. And so when this bee is all full of pollen, then he goes to the next flower, and that's going to stick on this stigma, and the pollination is going to begin. Now this is where I'm going to use my knife, because I'm going to try to get into the inside of, and like I said, you would do this at home, and if you could see under a magnifying glass, I'm going to pull this apart, and it's pretty hard to see in the naked eye, but in here you'll see two areas, which would be the ovary, and in here are the eggs waiting to be pollinated so that they can become seeds. And that would be hard to see. If you had a microscope, you could pull them out. I'm going to just show what that might look like. This is just a photo, but in here is the ovary of the plant, and see these little things here? That would be the oval or the eggs, and here's another view. Now if you had a much smaller flower, can you imagine how small that would be to try to dissect? So once that is fertilized and pollinated, those eggs start to turn into seeds, and then a fruit, the ovary goes around that and creates a fruit to protect the seeds inside. Once that has been pollinated, the flower has served its purpose. You'll see the leaves fall off, the flower starts to turn brown and die, and I have an example of that. This used to be a beautiful purple flower. This is what it looks like after all the leaves have come off, and this one, you can hear it, there's little seeds inside. So that's going to be carried by the wind. Here's another one, they might have fallen out so there you can see them coming out. So that is the main purpose, because now we're going to have more flowers growing because of that. Look at all those. So some flowers have a lot of seeds, and that's going to go. We're going to have more flowers, and that continues. That's how we get most of our fruit and vegetables. So I hope you've enjoyed dissecting a flower. Take a look around you at the different types of flowers and see if you can find those parts. The most visible, of course, are going to be your petals, and you're going to see your stamens and your anthers are going to be pretty visible. But that inside, very inside, where it's creating the seeds, you might need to use a microscope. So I hope you enjoyed. Thank you. If you would like to learn more about flowers, seeds, and pollination, check out the links at the end of our video. They'll take you to a lot of really great books about seeds and seeds and fruits and some of our pollinators, and you can explore more. And don't forget about our extraordinary things. You do need an adult card to check these out, but look at this. We have 2 microscopes available with a complete kit. This would be great to look at the different flower parts. We also have links to our Scholastic Teachables, so you can learn more about plants and maybe dissecting a flower. So I hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned for more educational videos. Goodbye.